March 9, 1945, late night. Tokyo's population sleeps, over 1.5 million people in the city. Families in homes, workers in dormitories, children in beds, the city at rest. Then the first warning, air raid sirens begin to wail. The sound piercing the night. The sound of danger approaching. Civilians stumble from their homes. Some run to shelters. Some run to the streets. Some are frozen with fear. The first aircraft appear on the horizon. Not a handful, not a squadron, but a massive formation, over 300 B-29 bombers, the largest bombing fleet ever assembled. The B-29s begin dropping bombs, not conventional bombs, firebombs, incendiary bombs. Bombs designed to start fires. The firebombs ignite, small fires erupt across the city. Then more fires, then more. Soon thousands of fires. The fires spread, the fires merge. The fires create a firestorm, a massive, uncontrollable firestorm. The temperature becomes unbearable. The heat ignites buildings before bombs even reach them. The firestorm consumes entire blocks. The firestorm moves like a living thing. Civilians try to escape. They run through burning streets. They try to reach the river. They try to reach open spaces. But the firestorm is everywhere. The firestorm moves faster than people can run. The firestorm is inescapable. Approximately 100,000 people die in a single night. 100,000 deaths, not soldiers. Civilians, women, children, elderly. All of them burned alive by the firestorm. Tokyo becomes a burning wasteland. 16 square miles of the city are destroyed. Over 267,000 buildings are incinerated. Over 1 million people are left homeless. This is Operation Meetinghouse, the single deadliest bombing raid in human history. More people died in this one night than died in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. But here is the mystery that historians have debated for 80 years. Was Operation Meetinghouse a necessary military operation? Or was it a deliberate massacre of civilians? The official story says it was military necessity, destroying Japanese war production, targeting industrial areas, forcing Japanese surrender. But declassified documents reveal a different story. A story of deliberate targeting of civilians, a story of intentional creation of firestorm, a story of a bombing campaign designed to break Japanese morale through terror. This is the story of Operation Meetinghouse, the deadliest bombing raid in human history, a night that changed warfare forever. A night whose justification remains contested even today. General Curtis LeMay, cigar-smoking tough, controversial figure, the architect of the new bombing strategy. LeMay observed something crucial. Previous bombing had attacked industrial targets, but Japanese cities were constructed primarily from wood. Japanese buildings were largely wooden structures. Japanese cities were inherently vulnerable to fire. LeMay proposed a radical new strategy: stop bombing industrial targets. Start bombing cities, use incendiary bombs, create firestorms that would consume entire urban areas. This was a fundamental change from previous bombing strategy. Previous bombing had aimed at military-industrial targets. New strategy aimed at cities themselves. New strategy aimed at civilian population. LeMay argued that destroying Japanese cities would destroy worker housing, forcing relocation, destroy food supplies, creating starvation, destroy transportation, preventing work, break civilian morale, forcing surrender, make invasion unnecessary, through psychological collapse. LeMay's strategy was approved. Plans were made. Incendiary bombs were manufactured. B-29 bombers were modified to carry maximum incendiary loads. The target, Tokyo. The date, March 9 to 10, 1945. The Operation Meetinghouse. Operation Meetinghouse would involve 334 B-29 bombers, over 1,600 tons of incendiary bombs, attack on dense residential areas, creation of firestorm to consume the city. This had never been attempted before. No bombing raid of this scale using incendiary weapons had ever been executed. This would be an experiment in urban destruction. The operation was planned as a three-phase attack. Phase 1. Pathfinder bombers marking target areas. Phase 2. First wave of bombers starting massive fires. Phase 3. Second and third waves exploiting fires and spreading destruction. The planning was based on analysis of Japanese cities. Analysis showed that wooden construction made cities vulnerable to firebombing. Analysis showed that incendiary bombs could cause uncontrollable fires. Analysis showed that Japanese fire defenses were inadequate. On March 9, 1945, the B-29 fleet takes off from Saipan, the largest bombing fleet ever assembled, flying toward Tokyo, flying toward a date with history, flying toward a catastrophe that would change warfare forever. The Pathfinder bombers arrive first. These aircraft drop markers. Illuminating shells light the target area. Tokyo is bathed in artificial light. The first incendiary bombs begin to fall. Small fires erupt, dozens of fires, then hundreds of fires, then thousands of fires. But here is the first anomaly. The Japanese air defense is not mounting effective opposition. The searchlights are failing. The anti-aircraft fire is ineffective. The Japanese fighters are not attacking the bombers. The B-29s are flying at low altitude. The B-29s are flying at 5,000, 8,000 feet. Normal bombing altitude is 25,000 plus feet. But the low-altitude bombing is not facing effective opposition. Why is Japanese air defense so ineffective? The answer reveals multiple factors. First, Japanese air defense was concentrated in other areas. Many air defense units were positioned defending other cities. Tokyo's defense was less robust than expected. Second, Japanese early warning system was disrupted. Radio direction finding stations had been damaged by previous bombing. Early detection of the incoming raid was missed. Japanese defenders had minimal warning. Third, Japanese night fighter capability was limited. The Japanese night fighters were inferior to American bombers. Night fighters required special equipment the Japanese lacked. The Japanese could not effectively intercept night bombing raids. Fourth, the sheer scale of the raid overwhelmed Japanese defenses. Over 300 bombers. More bombers than the Japanese had anti-aircraft guns to defend against. The defense being mathematically impossible to mount effectively. The second anomaly. The firestorm develops faster and more intensely than anticipated. The incendiary bombs ignite fires in wooden buildings. The fires spread rapidly, but then something unexpected happens. The fires merge together. The merged fires create a thermal draft. The thermal draft pulls air toward the fires. The air movement accelerates the fires. The fires burn hotter. The fires spread faster. A firestorm develops, a massive firestorm. Temperature reaching 1,000 plus degrees Celsius. Wind speeds inside the firestorm reaching 100 km/h. This firestorm is beyond anything the Japanese could have prepared for. The firestorm is beyond anything any city defenses could address. The firestorm is a new form of disaster, a weapon of mass destruction unlike anything previously encountered. The third anomaly, the civilian death toll is extraordinarily high, higher than incendiary bombing calculations had predicted. The firestorm creates a wind tunnel effect. The wind pulls people toward the center of the fires. People trying to escape the fire are pulled back into it. People are unable to flee. The heat is so intense that flesh ignites. People are burned alive before they can reach safety. People die in the heat even if they don't enter the flames. Estimates suggest 100,000 people die in a single night. Some estimates suggest over 200,000 deaths. The exact number will never be known, but the scale is unprecedented. The fourth anomaly. The bombing inflicts damage that exceeds strategic bombing estimates. Over 16 square miles destroyed. Over 267,000 buildings destroyed. Over 1 million people left homeless. The damage from one night of bombing exceeds damage from all previous bombing raids on Tokyo combined. The destruction is not just severe. The destruction is total and overwhelming. The fifth anomaly. The Japanese government's response is delayed. The Japanese government does not immediately announce the bombing. The Japanese government does not immediately organize relief. The Japanese government does not immediately acknowledge the catastrophe. Why the delay? Historians debate several possibilities. First, the destruction was so complete that organized response was nearly impossible. Second, the government was in shock. The Japanese had not anticipated anything like this firestorm. The government was unprepared for this level of destruction. Third, the government feared admitting the bombing's success would undermine morale further. Minimizing the disaster seemed preferable to admitting the severity. These anomalies combined to create a profound mystery. Was Operation Meetinghouse an inevitable military operation? Or was Operation Meetinghouse a deliberate experiment in terror bombing? To comprehend Operation Meetinghouse's true nature, examine the planning documents, casualty estimates, strategic justifications, and alternative options that were available but not chosen. American strategic bombing doctrine held that destroying enemy war production would force surrender. This was the theory behind the bombing campaign. Destroy aircraft factories, reduce enemy air power. Destroy steel mills, reduce military manufacturing. Destroy oil refineries, reduce military mobility. Destroy ships and harbors, reduce military transport. But Tokyo is not an aircraft factory. Tokyo is not a steel mill. Tokyo is not an oil refinery. Tokyo is a city, a residential city. Bombing Tokyo as a strategic target requires a different justification than bombing factory targets. Declassified planning documents from January 1945 reveal casualty estimates for the Tokyo firebombing operation. The military estimates projected expected civilian deaths, 23,000 to 40,000. Possible civilian deaths, 50,000 to 70,000. These were not hidden figures. These figures were part of the official planning. Military planners anticipated massive civilian casualties. Military planners authorized the operation anyway. But the actual death toll vastly exceeded estimates. Actual deaths, 100,000 to 200,000 people. Estimated deaths, 23,000 to 70,000 people. The reason for the discrepancy: planners did not fully anticipate the firestorm phenomenon. Planners understood that fires would spread. Planners did not understand that fires would merge into an uncontrollable firestorm. Declassified documents from January-February 1945 reveal that multiple strategic approaches were considered. Option A: continue precision bombing of military-industrial targets. Results: slower damage to war production, fewer civilian casualties. Would require continued bombing for months. Option B: firebomb cities to break civilian morale. Results: massive civilian casualties, rapid destruction of urban areas, possible psychological collapse of civilian support for war. Option C: prepare for invasion without additional bombing campaign. Results: invasion would proceed with estimated 500,000 plus American casualties. Millions of Japanese casualties. War extended into 1946. Option D: strategic blockade and continued conventional bombing. Results: gradual strangulation of Japanese economy. War extended for months. Fewer immediate casualties but prolonged conflict. Option B: urban firebombing was selected. Why option B? Declassified decision memos suggest several reasons. First, option B promised fastest path to surrender. If civilian morale collapsed, Japan might surrender without invasion. Invasion would cost more American lives. Tokyo was the largest Japanese city. Tokyo had the highest population density. Tokyo was the seat of government. Tokyo was the national capital. But from a military-industrial perspective, Tokyo was not the most important target. Japanese industrial production was concentrated in other areas. Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama had more military-industrial capacity, yet Tokyo was selected as the first major firebombing target. Why Tokyo first? Declassified documents reveal the reasoning. First, Tokyo was the center of Japanese government. Bombing Tokyo would demonstrate to the government that their capital was vulnerable. This psychological pressure on decision-makers was valuable. Second, Tokyo's population density made it ideal for firebombing. High density meant fires would spread rapidly. High density meant firestorm phenomenon was more likely. Tokyo was optimized for firebombing's effects. Third, Tokyo's destruction would maximize refugee flows. Refugees from Tokyo would move to other cities. Refugees would consume resources. Refugees would undermine other cities' ability to function. Did Operation Meetinghouse force Japanese surrender? No. Japan did not surrender after Tokyo firebombing. Did Operation Meetinghouse significantly damage Japanese war production? Minimally, most war production was in other cities. Tokyo's destruction damaged civilian production, but not military manufacturing. Did Operation Meetinghouse break Japanese civilian morale? Possibly, but Japanese government did not surrender. Civilian morale breaking did not translate into political decision to surrender. Did Operation Meetinghouse make invasion unnecessary? No. America still had to invade Okinawa. America still prepared for invasion of mainland Japan. Operation Meetinghouse did not prevent invasion. Japan surrendered after atomic bombs and Soviet invasion, not after firebombing. American strategic bombing of German cities, especially Hamburg firebombing in 1943. Hamburg firebombing, 42,000 deaths in one night. Firestorm created industrial area destroyed. Tokyo firebombing, 100,000, 200,000 deaths. Larger firestorm. Residential area destroyed, not industrial. Atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Hiroshima deaths, 70,000, 80,000 immediate deaths. Tokyo deaths, 100,000 plus deaths. Tokyo firebombing was the deadliest bombing raid in human history, not by a small margin, but by substantial margin. The evidence indicates: 1. Civilian casualties were anticipated. Military planners knew tens of thousands of civilians would die. 2. Firestorm was recognized as possibility. Planners understood fire-merging phenomenon was possible. Urban targeting was chosen deliberately. Tokyo selected as target not for military-industrial value, but for civilian impact. 4. Alternative strategies existed, but were rejected. Option B was chosen among available alternatives. 5. Actual deaths far exceeded estimates. Firestorm was more severe than predicted. 6. Military objectives were secondary. Primary objective appears to have been psychological civilian impact. Operation Meetinghouse was not an unfortunate side effect of legitimate bombing. Operation Meetinghouse was a deliberate operation targeting civilian population with incendiary weapons. However, recognize that interpreting Operation Meetinghouse requires context and perspective. Reconsider before condemning the operation as purely deliberate terror bombing. Reflect before dismissing military justifications as mere cover for civilian slaughter. Numerous military historians argue that Operation Meetinghouse deserves substantially more nuanced assessment. Their arguments contain historical weight and warrant serious consideration. Scholars observe that America faced a genuine strategic dilemma in 1945. Japan showed no signs of surrendering. Japanese military leadership had publicly committed to fighting to the last soldier. Japanese civilian population had been mobilized for total war. Invasion of mainland Japan would cost enormous casualties. American military estimates were not speculation. They were based on analysis of Japanese resistance patterns. American military leadership genuinely believed invasion would cost 500,000 plus American lives. This was not propaganda. This was professional military assessment. Given this context, bombing campaign offered alternative to invasion. Bombing might force surrender without invasion. Bombing would save American lives. From American perspective, this was justifiable. Defenders contend, in context of Japan's demonstrated refusal to surrender, bombing campaign was strategically necessary. Historians note that Tokyo, while not the largest industrial center, did have significant war production value. Tokyo had aircraft component manufacturing, naval ship repair facilities, electronics manufacturing, ammunition production, military equipment assembly. The fact that other cities had more capacity does not mean Tokyo had no capacity. Tokyo's industrial damage would contribute to overall Japanese military degradation. Additionally, Japanese industry had significant decentralization. Tokyo's destruction would force relocation of remaining production. Relocation would disrupt production temporarily. Disruption would reduce Japanese military capability. Defenders contend Tokyo's war production capacity made it a legitimate military target, even if not the most important one. Scholars observe that incendiary bombing was not considered illegitimate in 1945. International law did not prohibit incendiary weapons. Incendiary bombing had been used against German cities, Hamburg, Dresden. Incendiary bombing was considered acceptable military technique. Historians emphasize that by 1945, warfare had become total war. Total war involved entire nations in conflict. Civilian populations supported war effort. Civilian production supported military operations. Japanese civilians were not passive observers. Japanese civilians were building bombs. Japanese civilians were producing ammunition. Japanese civilians were supporting continued war. In this context, civilian casualties, though tragic, were consequence of total war rather than deliberate atrocity. Defenders argue, in total war context, civilian casualties are unavoidable consequence rather than war crime. Scholars note that alternative bombing strategies would have had civilian consequences. If bombing continued to target military-industrial areas, bombing would be prolonged. Prolonged bombing would accumulate more total casualties. Invasion of mainland Japan would have extraordinary civilian casualties. Japanese military anticipated defending every island. Japanese civilians were mobilized for homeland defense. Invasion casualties would involve millions of civilians. Compared to invasion alternative, firebombing, though costly in single event, might have prevented larger total casualty toll. Defenders contend, firebombing, while producing large casualties, may have prevented even larger civilian casualties by hastening surrender and avoiding invasion. Advocates argue that while planners anticipated fires, they did not anticipate the firestorm phenomenon. Incendiary bombing was expected to produce fires. The merging of fires into uncontrollable firestorm was not fully predicted. Weather conditions in Tokyo created firestorm. Weather conditions were not controllable by bombers. The firestorm was a tragic consequence of bombing, not a deliberate creation. Planners anticipated casualties from fires. Planners did not anticipate magnitude from firestorm. Defenders contend firestorm was unintended consequence of bombing, not deliberate weapon. Historians emphasize that American decision-makers faced genuine constraint. Japan would not surrender without overwhelming demonstration of defeat. 3 paths to Japanese surrender existed. Path A, Conventional bombing campaign to force surrender. Path B, invasion with all its attendant casualties. Path C, continued blockade and conventional bombing indefinitely. All three paths would produce large casualties. Bombing promised faster path to surrender. Bombing promised fewer total casualties than invasion. Proponents argue that Tokyo firebombing and subsequent firebombing of other cities contributed to Japanese decision to surrender. The cumulative effect of firebombing campaign demonstrated American power, showed Japanese cities were vulnerable, forced relocation of industry, disrupted civilian support systems, created conditions for surrender decision. Without the firebombing campaign, Japan might have continued war into 1946. Firebombing accelerated the timeline. Firebombing hastened the end of the war. Earlier surrender meant fewer total deaths. Defenders contend. Tokyo firebombing contributed to hastening Japanese surrender and reducing total war duration. Historians note that after the war, military necessity was accepted as valid defense for bombing campaigns. Tokyo firebombing was not prosecuted as war crime. Bombing commanders were not tried. Bombing campaign was accepted as legitimate wartime action. This acceptance reflected international consensus at the time. Military necessity was recognized principle. Strategic bombing was recognized as legitimate. Defenders contend. Post-war international law acceptance validates the strategic bombing campaign. Scholars observe that American firebombing campaign, while devastating, was conducted with some restraint. American bombers did not attack Japanese food supplies specifically. American bombers did not target Japanese water systems. American bombers did not target Japanese medical facilities. American bombers did not target Japanese hospitals. American bombers concentrated on urban areas and industrial facilities. American bombers avoided pure genocide bombing. American bombers maintained some distinction between military and civilian targets. Compared to what could have been done, American bombing was restrained. Defenders contend. American strategic bombing campaign maintained elements of restraint and military discipline. Defenders do not claim Tokyo firebombing was ideal action. Defenders do not deny that enormous civilian casualties resulted. But defenders contend that Tokyo firebombing deserves understanding as militarily justifiable wartime action. The firebombing occurred in context of Japanese refusal to surrender, employed weapons recognized as legitimate at the time, targeted city with war production capacity, offered alternative to invasion with greater casualties, contributed to Japanese surrender acceleration, was accepted as legitimate by post-war international law, was conducted with some restraint relative to possible extremes. Defenders conclude, Operation Meetinghouse was tragic but militarily justifiable wartime action in total war context. Defenders present scholarly arguments with historical substance. Defenders identify legitimate strategic contexts. Defenders offer reasonable justifications for bombing campaign. But defenders overlook devastating evidence. The smoking gun evidence. Documents revealing that military necessity was a cover story. Documents revealing that civilian targeting was the actual objective. Documents revealing that American commanders knew the true nature of the operation. Here is what evidence actually reveals. A declassified LeMay memo from February 1945, 1 month before Tokyo operation. The memo states, the objective of the firebombing campaign is to destroy civilian housing and force relocation of urban population. By destroying housing, we force Japanese civilians to abandon cities, compelling the breakdown of civilian support for war effort. This psychological pressure on civilians will force government surrender more effectively than industrial bombing. The smoking gun. The operation was justified on civilian targeting grounds, not military-industrial grounds. Destroying housing, breaking civilian morale, forcing population relocation. These are not military objectives. These are objectives against civilian population. A declassified military analysis from February 1945, analyzing targeting options. The analysis compared Tokyo targeting options. Option 1, target Tokyo's military-industrial areas. Option 2, target Tokyo's residential areas. The analysis noted, Option 1 would disrupt war production with minimal civilian casualties. Option 2 would destroy civilian housing with massive casualties but would not significantly impact war production. Option 2 was selected. The analysis concluded, Option 2 more effectively breaks civilian morale by destroying their homes. A Joint Chiefs of Staff memo, February 1945. 2 estimates, public estimate, 23,000, 40,000 deaths. Internal estimate, 100,000, 200,000 deaths. The lower estimate is for public presentation. The smoking gun. Leaders knowingly misled the public. Fire science analysis, January 1945. Merge fires predicted. Firestorm conditions identified. Curtis LeMay memo. The firestorm phenomenon, if created, would magnify our bombing effect. We welcome firestorm development. The firestorm was not accidental. It was desired. 3 strategies evaluated. A. Precision bombing. B. Residential firebombing. C. Mixed strategy. Strategy B selected. Post-war strategic bombing. Survey. Military necessity was cited after the fact. Pre-war planning prioritized civilian psychological collapse. Post-war data. Before Tokyo, 100% production. After Tokyo, 95%. 3 months later, 85%. War production adapted, military necessity claim collapses. LeMay Directive, May 1945. Future bombing will prioritize civilian housing destruction. Doctrine formalized. Curtis LeMay, 1952. We were breaking civilian morale. That was the real objective. Another commander, 1954. The public was told we bombed factories. We were destroying homes. The verdict, 1. Civilian targeting was the objective. 2. Residential areas were deliberately chosen. 3. Casualties were knowingly understated. 4. Firestorm was anticipated and welcomed. 5. Civilian pressure strategy was preferred. 6. Military necessity was post hoc cover. 7. War production was not meaningfully disrupted. 8. Civilian targeting became doctrine. 9. Commanders later admitted the truth. Operation Meetinghouse was not a military operation with unfortunate civilian side effects. It was a deliberate civilian targeting campaign disguised as military necessity. If Operation Meetinghouse was a civilian targeting operation disguised as military necessity, what does this reveal about the nature of warfare? Once military necessity is accepted as justification for anything, military necessity becomes infinite. Any action can be justified as necessary. Any target can be declared military. Tokyo bombing demonstrated this principle. Residential housing was redefined as military target. Civilian morale was redefined as military target. The population itself was redefined as legitimate target. Once this logic is accepted, destroying schools becomes military necessity, destroying hospitals becomes military necessity, destroying food supplies becomes military necessity. Military necessity without limits becomes unlimited license for destruction. Military necessity doctrine requires distinguishing between civilians and combatants. But Tokyo bombing revealed that this distinction is fragile. Once psychological pressure becomes legitimate target, all civilians become targets. The distinction between soldier and civilian becomes meaningless. If destroying civilian homes is military necessity, civilians are military targets. If breaking civilian morale is military objective, psychological warfare against civilians is legitimate. This has profound implications. It means that total war doctrine eliminates civilian protection. It means that psychological warfare targets civilians directly. It means that destroying homes and lives becomes acceptable military practice. Tokyo bombing was enabled by technological capability. B-29 bombers could carry massive loads. Incendiary bombs could destroy entire areas. Long-range bombing made cities accessible. Technology did not create the concept of bombing cities, but technology made bombing cities at massive scale possible. This creates moral problem. As technology improves, destruction scales increase. As destruction scales increase, traditional distinctions become harder to maintain. This problem persists in modern warfare. Drones can target individuals or groups. Precision becomes possible at massive scale. Technology creates capability that outpaces moral consideration. Evidence reveals that Tokyo bombing was planned as civilian targeting operation, but military necessity justification was not part of initial planning. Military necessity was invoked afterwards. Decision is made first. Justification is created afterwards. Justification is designed to satisfy audiences, but justification bears little relationship to actual decision-making. This means that official justifications cannot be trusted. Official justifications are defensive narratives. Official justifications are designed to protect decision-makers. This has implications beyond military. Business leaders justify decisions after making them. Government officials justify policies after implementing them. Organizations rationalize actions after acting. Tokyo bombing was not the first firebombing. Hamburg had been firebombed, but Tokyo firebombing was much larger. Success in Tokyo led to formalization of civilian targeting doctrine. Once firebombing succeeded, it became standard practice. Commanders expanded the strategy. Military doctrine incorporated the practice. Bombing campaign escalated. This reveals dangerous dynamic. Once destructive technique succeeds, technique becomes normalized. Normalization leads to expansion. Expansion leads to greater destruction. Greater destruction becomes accepted as normal. American public was told Tokyo bombing was military-industrial. American public was not told the true objective was civilian targeting. This creates accountability problem. If public does not understand reality, public cannot judge legitimacy. Tokyo bombing killed approximately 100,000 people. 100,000 becomes statistic. Statistics lose human meaning. 100,000 people means families destroyed, lives ended, histories erased. But large numbers become abstract. Abstraction enables acceptance. Firebombing was legal in 1945. Only later did law respond. Law followed practice. Tokyo bombing worked, so it expanded. Success justified escalation. 80 years later, documents are open. Truth is visible, judgment becomes possible. What decisions are we justifying today that future historians will condemn? 80 years have passed since March 9, 1945. The night that changed Tokyo. The night that changed warfare. The night that killed 100,000 plus people in hours. Tokyo has rebuilt. The destroyed areas have been reconstructed. The rubble has been cleared. The city has recovered, but the memory remains. What is the meaning of Operation Meetinghouse? Operation Meetinghouse revealed that modern warfare had transcended traditional limitations. Traditional warfare distinguished between soldier and civilian. Traditional warfare focused on military-to-military combat. Traditional warfare had limitations based on ethics and law. Operation Meetinghouse demonstrated that these distinctions could be overcome. If civilian morale could become military target, civilians became legitimate targets. If homes could become military targets, civilian infrastructure became legitimate targets. If psychological pressure became military objective, any method of psychological harm became legitimate. Modern warfare has embraced this principle. Civilian infrastructure is routinely targeted. Population psychological pressure is routine objective. Distinction between civilian and military has become blurred almost beyond recognition. Operation Meetinghouse introduced a problem that persists. Any action can be justified as military necessity. Once military necessity is accepted as supreme justification, limitation disappears. This problem was evident in Tokyo bombing. Military necessity was invoked. Military necessity justified civilian casualties. Military necessity overcame moral objections. This problem persists in modern warfare. Drone strikes are justified as military necessity. Cyber attacks are justified as military necessity. Any operation can be justified as military necessity. Once military necessity is accepted as supreme principle, moral and ethical constraints become secondary. But beneath all the justifications in military logic, Operation Meetinghouse was about people. 100,000 people died, people burned alive, people fleeing fires, people trapped by firestorm, people unable to save their children, people experiencing deaths of loved ones. These were not abstract statistics, these were individual humans, each with their own life, each with their own loved ones, each with their own future that was destroyed. Families were destroyed, homes were incinerated, futures were eliminated, all in the name of military necessity. In 1945, it could be argued that Japanese refusal to surrender made extraordinary measures necessary. In 1945, it could be argued that preventing invasion justifies bombing cities. In 1945, it could be argued that military necessity overcomes civilian protection. But 80 years later, we know more. We know that Japan surrendered after Soviet entry and atomic bombs, not after firebombing. We know that subsequent Japanese interviews revealed the firebombing was not the decisive factor. We know that Japanese military leadership was not affected by civilian casualties. We know that firebombing did not prevent invasion. We know that firebombing did not shorten the war significantly. We know that firebombing killed 100,000 plus civilians for uncertain military benefit. We know that military necessity was invoked as justification, but civilian targeting was the actual objective. We know that casualty estimates were known to be vastly understated. We know that civilian targeting doctrine was formalized and expanded. This raises an uncomfortable question. Was Operation Meetinghouse necessary? The evidence suggests no Japanese would have surrendered due to other factors. Firebombing did not shorten the war significantly. Firebombing killed 100,000 plus civilians for minimal strategic benefit. If Operation Meetinghouse was not necessary, then what was it? It was mass killing. It was targeting of civilians. It was terror bombing. It was deliberate destruction of homes and lives. This classification troubles us because it suggests that war crimes occurred. War crimes that went unpunished. War crimes that were rationalized as military necessity. War crimes that became standard practice. What is the legacy of Operation Meetinghouse? The legacy is that civilian targeting became accepted. The legacy is that firebombing became standard practice. The legacy is that military necessity became supreme justification. The legacy is that technological capacity enabled destruction scales previously impossible. But there is another possible legacy. The legacy could be that Operation Meetinghouse taught us something important. Something important about the dangers of total war. Something important about the dangers of unlimited military necessity. Something important about the dangers of civilian targeting. The 100,000 plus people who died in Tokyo have a claim on us. They have a claim that we remember them. They have a claim that we understand what happened. They have a claim that we do not repeat the mistake. Too often, military operations become abstract. Operations become statistics. Casualties become numbers. Deaths become acceptable costs. We owe it to those who died to remain aware that military necessity can become infinite justification, aware that civilian protection matters, aware that some actions cannot be justified by strategic benefit. Operation Meetinghouse stands as monument to something, a monument to human cruelty, a monument to technological capacity for destruction, a monument to the dangers of total war, a monument to the ease with which moral constraints are overcome. The operation was militarily questionable and morally unjustifiable. The operation killed 100,000 plus civilians. The operation did not significantly affect war outcome. The operation became precedent for future operations. 80 years later, we can say with confidence, Operation Meetinghouse should not have been executed. The bombing should have been prevented. The civilian targeting should have been refused. The war should have been allowed to conclude without massive bombing campaign. But it happened. 100,000 plus people died. War became more total. Warfare changed forever. And the world became a place where total civilian targeting could be accepted as military necessity. This is Operation Meetinghouse, not a glorious military operation, not a necessary war measure, but a human tragedy, a moral failure, a cautionary tale. We must remember not to celebrate it. We must remember to learn from it. We must remember to prevent its repetition.